Chapter 1. The Archive Trail. He already knew the man was dead. He just did not know yet that he had killed him. That thought would come later. At 3 in the morning, in a motel outside Baltimore, with a glass of water, he forgot to drink and a document he could not stop reading. But on the morning of March 4th, 2003, Daniel Marsh was simply a man walking into work, coffee in hand, badge around his neck, 12 years of quiet, invisible loyalty behind him. Nobody looked at him twice. That was the point. The basement level of CIA headquarters in Langley had no windows, no natural light, no sense of time, no connection to the world happening above it, just white ceiling panels, the low mechanical hum of air conditioning, and row after row of desks where analysts spent their careers reading things that would never be made public. Marsh had worked here since 1991. He knew every corner of this floor the way a man knows his own apartment. The broken chair in room 4. The coffee machine that dispensed lukewarm water if you pressed the button twice. The archive cabinet in the far corridor that nobody ever opened because the handle stuck. He had opened it that morning. The folder on his desk had arrived before he did, marked urgent in red, marked eyes only in black. 14 days before Secretary of State Colin Powell was scheduled to stand before the United Nations and present the American case for war in Iraq, someone needed an analyst to review and confirm the intelligence underneath it, to read it, assess it, and sign his name at the bottom of page 47. Marsh was that analyst. He sat down, took off his jacket, and opened the folder. The first 20 pages were clean, almost surgical in their precision, satellite imagery of suspected production facilities outside Baghdad, chemical composition breakdowns, timelines of alleged weapons transfers. Everything cross-referenced, everything formatted, everything pointing in one direction with the kind of confidence that made Marsh instinctively slow down. In his experience, real intelligence never looked this certain. Real intelligence was messy. It contradicted itself. It had gaps and question marks and dissenting footnotes from officers in the field who had seen something that did not fit the model. This had none of that. On page 23, he found the source, a single code name, Curveball. Marsh put the page down. He did not reach for his coffee. He did not make a note. He simply sat very still for a moment, the way a person does when something familiar appears, somewhere it should not be. He had seen that name 5 years ago, in a different folder, in a different context, during a routine review of European asset assessments in 1998. He remembered it not because the source was important, but because the warning attached to it was unusually direct. German intelligence, which had recruited and handled the man, had sent a formal written assessment to the American side, stating that the source was considered unreliable, that he was politically motivated, that he had a history of exaggerating or fabricating details to make himself seem more valuable, that none of his core claims had ever been independently verified. That warning had been documented, stamped, filed. Marsh got up from his desk and walked to the far corridor, the archive cabinet with the handle that stuck. He worked it open the way he always did, angling it slightly to the left, found the drawer, found the year, found the folder. It took him 4 minutes. The German intelligence warning was exactly where it should have been. 1 page, clear language, formal letterhead, a date in the upper right corner, November 1998. He read it once, then again, then held it next to the page from the current folder with Curveball's name on it. 2 documents, same source, completely opposite conclusions. Someone had known about this warning and had not included it. That was not an accident. Accidents produced gaps. This had produced a replacement, a clean, confident, well-formatted replacement that was now 2 weeks away from being presented to the entire world as the reason to start a war. Marsh stood in the corridor for a long time, long enough that the motion sensor light above him switched off and left him standing in the dark. He did not move to turn it back on. When he finally returned to his desk, he wrote a short internal memo to his supervisor, Brian Collins. He kept it professional and without accusation. He simply noted that the archive contained a prior assessment of the Curveball source that appeared to contradict the current document and that he wanted guidance before signing off. He sent it at 11:04 in the morning and then sat watching the cursor blink on his empty screen. The reply came at 11:43. 4 words this time, not 3. Sign it. We're done. Marsh read it once, then he closed the message. Then he did something that in 12 years of service he had never done. He picked up the 1998 German intelligence warning, folded it once along the center, and placed it inside the front pocket of his briefcase. He put on his jacket. He picked up his coffee cup even though it was empty, because a man carrying a coffee cup looks like a man on his way somewhere ordinary. He walked to the elevator. He rode it to the ground floor. He nodded to the guard at the exit. He pushed through the glass doors into the cold March air. Behind him, inside the building, a small automated flag had already appeared in the internal security system. 4 words in a data field that most people never checked. Unauthorized archive access detected. And on the 4th floor, in an office with no nameplate on the door, a man named Richard Hale was drinking his 3rd coffee of the morning when the notification appeared on his secondary monitor. He read it without changing his expression. He set his cup down slowly. He opened a separate encrypted window on his screen and typed a single sentence. Then he picked up his desk phone and made a call that lasted less than 90 seconds. When it was over, he leaned back in his chair and looked at the ceiling for a moment. He had hoped it would not be Marsh. Marsh was good at his job. That was exactly the problem. Chapter 2. The Man Who Should Not Exist. He already knew the man was dead. He just did not know yet that he had killed him. That thought would come later. At 3 in the morning, in a motel outside Baltimore, with a glass of water he forgot to drink and a document he could not stop reading. But on the evening of March 4th, 2003, Daniel Marsh was simply a man who had made a choice. He had taken a classified document out of the building. He had crossed a line he could not uncross. And now he was driving north on Interstate 95 with his briefcase on the passenger seat and no plan beyond the next exit. He did not go home. Home had become a place where silence asked questions he could not answer. His apartment in Arlington was small, clean, and almost aggressively empty. No photographs on the walls, no books left open on tables. Just the kind of order that comes from living alone long enough that you stop pretending anyone else will ever see it. His ex-wife used to say he lived like a man preparing to disappear. She had meant it as criticism. She had not known how close to the truth she was. He drove until the highway thinned and the signs started marking distances to places that did not matter. He pulled off near Baltimore and found a motel with a parking lot full of trucks and a neon sign that buzzed in the dark. The room smelled like old carpet and cleaning chemicals. He sat on the edge of the bed, opened his briefcase, and spread the two documents side by side on the thin floral bedspread. On the left, the 1998 warning. On the right, the current intelligence file. He had spent 12 years reading files like this, 12 years learning to see the shape of truth underneath language. And what he was looking at now was not a mistake. It was architecture. Someone had taken an unreliable source, stripped away every warning, repackaged the claims, and sent them up the chain with enough bureaucratic weight that nobody would question it. The question was why. Marsh pulled out a notebook and started writing names. Everyone who would have had access to both documents, everyone whose signature appeared on the routing slip. 7 names. He stared at them for a long time. People he had worked alongside for years, people who had families and mortgages and reasons to show up every morning and do their jobs, people who were not supposed to be capable of this. That was when the other possibility entered his mind, the one he had been avoiding. What if this was not a small group covering up bad intelligence? What if this was the intelligence they wanted? He put the pen down and looked at the document again, and that was when he saw it. At the bottom of the intelligence summary, buried in the citation format, was a reference number for a debriefing session with Curveball. The session had supposedly taken place in Frankfurt in January 2003, 2 months ago. But the reference number was wrong, not by much, just 1 digit off from the standard European theater format that the agency had been using since 2001. It was the kind of error that nobody would catch unless they had spent years reading these exact kinds of files, unless they knew the format the way a pianist knows a wrong note. Marsh opened his laptop and logged into the agency's internal archive through the encrypted VPN. He pulled up the debriefing logs for January 2003, searched by reference number, searched by date, searched by location, nothing. He widened the search. Pulled every debrief session with any source in Germany for the first quarter of 2003. Curveball's name did not appear once. The session had never happened. Someone had fabricated the reference, and if they had fabricated it, that meant they knew no one would check. Because the kind of person who checks citation numbers in a 2-week sprint before a UN presentation is exactly the kind of person they would not want anywhere near this file. Marsh sat very still. Then he opened the personnel directory and searched for the original case officer who had handled Curveball in 1998, Eric Dorn, stationed in Munich, retired in 2001. Last known address, a small town in Virginia, 40 minutes south of where Marsh was sitting right now. He looked at the clock. It was 2:47 in the morning. He picked up his keys. The house was small and set back from the road, hidden by trees that had not been trimmed in years. No lights on inside, no car in the driveway, just the shape of a structure that had outlasted the person who used to care for it. Marsh parked on the street and sat in the car for a moment. This was the last moment he could turn around, the last moment he could pretend he had not seen what he had seen. He got out of the car. The gravel path crunched under his feet. The porch steps creaked. He knocked twice and waited. Nothing. He knocked again, harder this time. A light came on inside. Then a voice, rough and cautious, came through the door. "It is 4 in the morning. Whoever you are, you have got the wrong house. Marsh spoke clearly. My name is Daniel Marsh. I work for the agency. I need to talk to you about a source you handled in Germany. Codename Curveball. A long silence. Then the sound of a lock turning. The door opened 6 inches. A man in his 60s stood in the gap, gray hair uncombed, eyes sharp despite the hour. He looked at Marsh the way a former intelligence officer looks at anyone, by cataloging everything they are not saying. Give me your phone, Marsh hesitated. Now. Marsh handed it over. Dorn turned it off, pulled the battery, and set both pieces on a table inside the door. Then he looked past Marsh into the dark street, scanning the tree line, the parked cars, the empty road. Finally, he stepped back and opened the door the rest of the way. Get inside, and do not turn on any more lights. The interior of the house was neat but worn. Furniture that had not been updated in decades, walls that still held the faint outline of where picture frames used to hang. Dorn motioned Marsh toward a couch and disappeared into the back of the house. He returned a minute later with 2 glasses of water and sat down across from him in the dark. You said Curveball. He is in a current file, a big one. They are citing him as a primary source for intelligence on Iraqi bioweapons. They are presenting it to the UN in less than 2 weeks. Dorn set his glass down slowly. They can't be. They are. Then someone is lying. I put it in writing. I sent it to Langley. I sent it to Berlin. Marsh reached into a jacket and pulled out the folded page from the archive. He handed it to Dorn. Dorn read it in silence. Then he looked up. This is my report. I know, it is in the archive, but it is not in the current file. And the current file cites a debrief session from 2 months ago that does not exist in any log. Dorn's face went very still. Who signed off on the current assessment? Marsh read the names from his notebook. Dorn listened without interrupting. When Marsh finished, Dorn walked to the window and looked out through a gap in the curtains. He stayed there for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. You know what you are holding? A discrepancy. No, you are holding proof that someone decided the truth was inconvenient, and they decided it long enough ago to bury my report and build an entire case on top of a lie. Marsh felt something cold settle in his chest. What happened to Curveball after you flagged him? Dorn turned away from the window. I filed that report in November 1998. 2 months later, I was rotated out of Munich. No explanation, no reassignment. I spent the next 3 years in a basement office in Bethesda doing threat assessments on Cuban fishing boats. I retired the day I was eligible, and I have not spoken to anyone from the agency since. You think you were punished. I think I was erased. Marsh leaned forward. Eric, if they use this source to justify the war and it falls apart later, people will die, not just soldiers, strategies, alliances, everything. Dorn walked to a small desk in the corner, opened a drawer, and pulled out a folded envelope. He held it for a moment, then handed it to Marsh. After I sent that report, I got a call from a man I had never met. He did not give his name. He said Curveball was being handled at a different level now and that my assessment was no longer relevant. I asked what that meant. He said it meant I should stop asking questions. I wrote down everything I could remember from that call. Marsh opened the envelope. Inside was a single handwritten page, a date, a time, the exact words, and at the bottom, one line underlined twice. He said that some sources are valuable not because they are right, but because they are useful. Marsh folded the page and put it in his pocket. Where is Curveball now? The Germans cut him loose in 2000. After that, nothing. But someone kept him active in the American system. Someone needed him to stay alive on paper. Who? Dorn met his eyes. Someone who needed a war. Marsh left the house 10 minutes later. Dorn walked him to the door but stopped him before he stepped outside. Listen to me. You seem like a decent guy. So I'm going to say this once. You cannot win this. You can write a memo. You can file a complaint. And you know what will happen? They will smile. They will thank you for your diligence. And then they will put you somewhere quiet until you forget what quiet costs. Marsh looked back at him. Then what should I do? Dorn's expression was tired and empty in a way that only comes from experience. Go home, sign the paper, keep your job, pretend you never saw any of this. Marsh nodded slowly, but they both knew he was not going to do that. Marsh walked back to Ian's car. The street was still empty. The sky was beginning to lighten at the edges. He unlocked the door, slid into the driver's seat, and reached for his seatbelt. That was when he saw it. A small white card tucked under the windshield wiper on the driver's side. He stared at it for a long moment. Then he got out of the car, pulled the card free, and turned it over. Blank. No name, no number, no message. Just blank white cardstock. Marsh looked up and down the street. Nothing moved. No cars, no lights, no sound except the wind in the trees. Someone had been here. Someone had watched him go inside. Someone had waited. And someone wanted him to know it. He got back in the car, locked the doors, and sat there with the card in his hand. Then he put the car in gear and drove. He was halfway back to Langley when his phone buzzed. A text message, internal number, no name attached, report to 4th floor, room 447, 7 a.m. Do not discuss with your supervisor. Marsh pulled over onto the shoulder of the highway. Cars blurred past him in the early morning light. He read the message again. He had never been to the 4th floor. Nobody he knew had ever been to the 4th floor. He sat there for a long time, engine idling, hands gripping the steering wheel. Then he pulled back onto the highway and drove toward Langley. Chapter 3. The lie approved from above. The 4th floor did not exist on any map Marsh had ever seen. He had worked at Langley for 12 years and had never once been told there was anything above the 3rd floor worth knowing about. The elevator panel had a button, but it required a keycard clearance he did not have. Until this morning, when he swiped his badge and the button lit up green without resistance. The elevator rose in silence. When the doors opened, there was no lobby, no reception desk, no directory on the wall, just a long hallway with gray carpet, recessed lighting, and doors with numbers but no names. The air smelled different here. Cleaner, colder, like a place where nothing was allowed to stay long enough to decay. Room 447 was at the end of the hall. Marsh stood in front of it for a moment, briefcase in hand, the blank white card still in his jacket pocket. He had not slept. He had not eaten. He had spent the last hour in his car in the parking garage trying to decide whether walking into this room was surrender or strategy. He knocked twice. A voice from inside, calm and even, said, "Come in." The office was smaller than he expected. No windows, a single desk, 2 chairs. And behind the desk sat a man Marsh had seen before but never spoken to. Mid-50s, graying hair, suit pressed to the point of erasure. the kind of face that photographs forget. His name was Richard Hale, Deputy Director of Operations, a title that meant almost nothing and almost everything depending on who was asking. Hale gestured to the chair across from him. "Sit down, Daniel." Marsh sat. He kept his briefcase on his lap. Hale noticed but said nothing. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Hale simply looked at him the way a doctor looks at an X-ray, searching for the fracture that is not yet broken through the skin. Finally, Hale leaned back in his chair. "You've had a long night." It was not a question. Marsh said nothing. Hale opened a thin folder on his desk. Inside were printouts, timestamps, security logs, a photograph of Marsh's car in a motel parking lot, another photograph of a house in Virginia, a third photograph of Marsh standing on a porch at 4 in the morning. Hale closed the folder. "You went to see Eric Dorn?" "I did." "Why?" "Because I found a discrepancy in a file I was asked to sign. I wanted clarification from the original case officer." "At 4 in the morning?" "It could not wait." Hale smiled. It was a small smile, thin and without warmth, the kind that appears when someone has heard a lie so many times it no longer offends them. "You are a careful man, Daniel. 12 years of exemplary service, no disciplinary record, no security violations, so I am going to extend you a courtesy. I am going to tell you the truth." Marsh said nothing. Hale leaned forward. "The file you were asked to review is correct. The intelligence has been verified at multiple levels. The source has been reassessed and cleared for use. The discrepancy you found is a clerical error from an outdated evaluation. Your concerns, while noted, are not relevant." Marsh kept his voice level. "The debrief session cited in the current file does not exist in any archive log." Hale did not blink. "Some sessions are conducted outside standard documentation protocols for operational security reasons. The German intelligence service flagged the source as unreliable in 1998. The German intelligence service has since revised its position based on new information. I spoke to the original case officer. He says that is not true." Hale's expression did not change, but something cold entered his eyes. "Eric Dorn is a retired officer with no current access to classified material and no standing to comment on active assessments. What he told you is his opinion. It is not policy." Marsh felt the room tighten around him. "Then let me be clear. The reference number in the file is fabricated. The debrief session never happened, and the source is the same man who was flagged as a fabricator 5 years ago. Someone removed that warning and built a case for war on top of a lie." The silence that followed was absolute. Hale folded his hands on the desk and looked at Marsh with the kind of patience that comes from knowing exactly how a conversation will end. "Let me be clear in return, Daniel. You are an analyst. You read documents. You assess probability. You do not set policy. You do not make strategic decisions. Your job is to confirm that the work in front of you meets the technical standards required for authorization, which it does. And if those standards are based on false information, then you note the discrepancy in your internal review and you allow the appropriate oversight bodies to evaluate it. You do not take classified material out of the building. You do not drive to the home of a retired officer in the middle of the night. And you do not accuse your colleagues of fabricating intelligence to justify a war." Marsh felt the air leave his lungs. Hale opened the folder again and pulled out a single sheet of paper. He slid it across the desk. It was a termination notice, pre-signed, dated today. This is what happens if you continue. Immediate suspension, loss of clearance, loss of pension, possible prosecution for mishandling classified material. You took a document out of this building, Daniel. That alone is enough. Marsh stared at the paper. Hale leaned back. Or, you go back to your desk. You sign the assessment. You file your internal note if it makes you feel better. And you continue doing the work you have done quietly and competently for 12 years. No one will question your loyalty. No one will remember this conversation. He paused. The choice is yours. Marsh looked up. And if I am right, if this source is lying and the case falls apart and people die because we invaded a country based on fabricated intelligence, Hale's face remained perfectly still. Then that will be a tragedy, and it will be investigated, and lessons will be learned. But it will not be your fault, Daniel. Because you will have done your job. The system is broken. The system is under pressure. There is a difference. Marsh stood up. I need time to think. Hale nodded. You have until end of business today. After that, the decision will be made for you. Marsh walked out of the office and down the long gray hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed above him. His footsteps made no sound on the carpet. When he reached the elevator, he pressed the button and waited. The doors opened. Inside, standing against the back wall, was a woman he had never seen before. Mid-30s, dark suit, face blank and professional. She did not look at him. She did not acknowledge him. But when the doors closed and the elevator began to descend, she spoke without turning her head. Do not go back to your desk. Marsh froze. Do not go home. Do not use your phone. Do not log into any agency system. Who are you? She reached into her jacket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper. She held it out without looking at him. There's a coffee shop on M Street. Be there at noon. Sit by the window. Someone will find you. Marsh took the paper. Why should I trust you? The elevator stopped on the ground floor. The doors opened. The woman stepped out and walked away without looking back. Marsh stood in the elevator, holding the paper, his heart pounding. He looked down. An address, nothing else. And underneath, in small handwriting, you are not the first. Marsh left the building at 9:47 a.m. He did not go to his desk. He simply walked out through the main entrance across the parking lot and got into his car. The coffee shop was small, cramped, and loud with the sound of espresso machines and overlapping conversations. Marsh sat by the window with a cup he did not drink and watched every person who walked through the door. At 12:14, a man in a gray coat sat down across from him. Older, maybe 60, with a kind of worn face that comes from decades of sleepless nights and controlled fear. He set a newspaper on the table and folded his hands. My name is Peter Moss. I used to work in the Directorate of Intelligence. I left in 2001. Marsh said nothing. Moss leaned forward slightly. I know what you found. I know because I found the same thing 2 years ago. Different operation, same method. They took a source we knew was compromised and used him anyway because the intelligence fit the policy they had already decided on. I wrote a report. I escalated it. I was told to revise my assessment or resign. What did you do? I resigned. And then I spent 2 years trying to warn people, journalists, congressional staffers, anyone who would listen. No one did. Because without the documents, I was just a disgruntled former employee with an axe to grind. Marsh felt his throat tighten. Why are you telling me this? Moss slid the newspaper across the table. Underneath it was a thin manila envelope. Because you still have access. You still have the documents. And you still have a choice. I did not. Marsh looked at the envelope. What is this? Names, dates, 3 other analysts who found the same kind of discrepancies in the last 18 months. All of them were reassigned or encouraged to leave. All of them were told the same thing you were told this morning. Ma stood up. If you want this to stop, you need to go outside the building. You need to find someone who will print it, and you need to do it before they bury you the way they buried the rest of us. He turned to leave. Marsh grabbed his arm. If I do this, what happens to me? Moss looked at him with tired, steady eyes. You lose everything. Your job, your clearance, maybe your freedom. But you get to sleep at night. And 20 years from now, when the bodies are counted and the lies are finally acknowledged, you will know you tried. He pulled his arm free and walked out. Marsh opened the envelope. 5 pages, names, dates, documented discrepancies. A pattern so clear it could not be accidental. And at the bottom of the last page, a single handwritten line. They are not making mistakes. They are making choices. Marsh folded the pages and put them in his jacket. Then he stood up, left the coffee shop, and walked 3 blocks to a payphone outside a convenience store. He fed coins into the slot and dialed a number he had memorized years ago but never called. The phone rang twice. A voice answered, professional, cautious. Washington Post. How can I direct your call? Marsh took a breath. I need to speak to someone in investigative reporting. I have documents about Iraq, about intelligence, and I think you are going to want to see them. There was a pause on the other end. Then the voice said, hold please. Marsh stood in the cold, listening to the hold music, watching his breath fog in the air. Behind him, half a block away, a man in a dark jacket leaned against a parked car and raised a camera. The shutter clicked. Then the man lowered the camera, pulled out his phone, and made a call that lasted 3 seconds. Chapter 4. The operation to erase a witness. The door to his apartment was open, not wide, just half an inch. Enough that when Marsh reached the top of the stairs and saw the gap between the frame and the edge of the door, his entire body went cold. He had locked it. He knew he had locked it. 12 years of training had made locking doors as automatic as breathing. But now the door was open and the hallway was silent, and every instinct in his body told him to turn around and walk away. He did not walk away. He pushed the door open slowly and stepped inside. Nothing looked broken. Nothing looked taken. The furniture was exactly where he had left it. The books on the shelf were in the same order. The kitchen was clean. But something was wrong. Not in what he could see, in what he could feel. The air was different. The space had been disturbed in a way that left no evidence except the certainty that he was no longer alone in his own life. He walked through the apartment room by room, the bedroom, the bathroom, the closet, everything untouched, everything perfect. Then he opened the drawer where he kept his passport. It was still there, but it was facing the wrong direction. He always kept it face down. Now it was face up. They wanted him to know. Marsh sat down on the edge of his bed and looked at his hands. They were shaking, not a little, visibly trembling, fingers twitching with adrenaline his body did not know how to process. He had spent 12 years reading about people whose lives had been dismantled by invisible forces. He had never once understood what it felt like, the physical weight of fear, the way it lived in your throat and made swallowing difficult. He forced himself to stand. He checked his watch. He had 3 hours until the meeting with the journalist. He left the apartment and did not lock the door behind him. There was no point. The meeting was supposed to take place at a hotel bar in Georgetown. Marsh arrived 20 minutes early and sat in a corner booth where he could see both entrances. He ordered coffee he did not drink and watched every person who walked through the door. At 4:47 p.m., a woman in her 40s approached the table. Short dark hair, glasses, the kind of face that made you forget what she looked like the moment she left the room. She held a notebook and a pen, but no recording device. She sat down without asking. "Daniel Marsh?" He nodded. "My name is Claire Lindgren. I cover intelligence for the Post. You said you had documents." Marsh reached into his jacket and pulled out the envelope. He set it on the table between them. Lindgren looked at it but did not reach for it. Instead, she pulled out her phone, opened her photos, and turned the screen toward him. On the screen was a photograph of the exact same document he had just placed on the table. The 1998 German intelligence warning, clear and readable. Marsh felt his stomach drop. "Where did you get that?" "Someone sent it to me this morning. No name, no message, just the photo. From an encrypted number I have never seen before." She looked at him carefully. "So either someone else inside the agency is trying to blow the whistle on the same thing you found, or someone is setting one of us up." Marsh stared at the photo. "When did you get it?" 6:42 this morning. Before he had even left his apartment, before he had called her. Someone had known he was going to contact her and had sent the document first. Lindgren leaned forward. "I need you to tell me the truth. Are you working with anyone else?" "No." "Are you sure?" "Yes." She studied his face for a long moment. Then she picked up the envelope and opened it. She pulled out the documents and compared them to the photo on her phone, line by line, word for word. Finally, she set them down. "They match, which means either you are telling the truth or someone went to a lot of trouble to make sure our stories align." "What does that mean?" "It means I cannot run this yet. Not until I know whether this is real intelligence or bait." Marsh felt panic rising. "This is real. I pulled it from the archive myself." "I believe you. But someone else knew you were going to pull it. Someone else knew you were going to bring it to me. And that means either you are being helped or you are being used." She slid the documents back across the table. "I need 48 hours. I need to verify the metadata on that photo. I need to confirm the document through a second source, and I need you to stay quiet until I do. People are going to die if this does not get out. People are going to die either way. The question is whether we tell the truth or help someone bury it deeper." She stood up. "I will call you when I know more. Do not contact me again until then." She walked out. Marsh sat alone at the table, staring at the envelope. Someone had sent her the document before he did. Someone had known exactly what he was going to do. He pulled out his phone. His hands were still shaking. He scrolled through his contacts and stopped on a name he had not called in 3 years. Brian Collins, his supervisor, the man who had told him to sign and close. Marsh stared at the name for a long time. Then he dialed. The phone rang 4 times. Then Collins answered, his voice clipped and tense. "Marsh, where are you? I need to talk to you. You were supposed to report to me this morning. You did not. You left the building without authorization." "I know. That is why I am calling. I need to explain." There was a pause. Marsh could hear background noise, traffic, wind. Collins was outside. "Where are you right now?" "Georgetown. I can meet you anywhere you want." Another pause, longer this time. Then Collins's voice came back quieter, almost strained. "There's a parking garage on K Street, level 3. I will be there in 20 minutes. "Brian, come alone, Daniel, please." The line went dead. Marsh sat very still. The word please. Collins never said please. The parking garage was nearly empty. Rows of concrete pillars and dim fluorescent lights, and the echo of his own footsteps. He took the stairs to level 3 and stopped at the top. Collins was already there, standing next to a black sedan, hands in his pockets. But something was wrong. His posture was too stiff, his face too pale. Marsh walked toward him slowly. "Brian." Collins did not move. He just stood there, staring at Marsh with an expression that was not anger or disappointment. It was fear. "You should not have called me, Daniel. I did not know who else to call. That is the problem. You think you still have someone." Marsh stopped walking. He was 15 feet away now, close enough to see that Collins's hands were trembling in his pockets. "What is going on?" Collins pulled his right hand out slowly. He was holding a phone. "I gave them your location the moment you called." Marsh felt the air leave his lungs. "What?" Collins' voice cracked. "They came to my house last night. They showed me pictures of my daughter, Rachel, at school, at soccer practice, getting into my wife's car. They did not say anything. They just showed me the pictures and asked if I knew where you were." Marsh took a step back. "Brian, I told them I did not know, and then this morning they sent me a video. Rachel walking to class, time-stamped 30 minutes earlier, with a message. Next time we ask, you answer faster." Collins pulled his other hand out of his pocket. He was holding a gun. Not aimed, just held at his side, shaking. Marsh froze. "They told me to bring you in. They said if I did not, they would make sure Rachel never made it to her 13th birthday. Brian, put the gun down." "I am sorry, Daniel. I am so sorry." Collins raised the gun, not at Marsh, at his own head. "They are listening right now. They are watching. And if I do not do this right, my daughter dies." Marsh heard the sound of engines, 2 black SUVs turning onto the garage ramp, headlights sweeping across the concrete. Collins lowered the gun and dropped it on the ground. Then he stepped back and raised his hands. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I'm so sorry." The SUVs stopped 20 feet away. Doors opened. 4 men in suits stepped out. No badges, no weapons visible. Just the kind of authority that does not need to announce itself. Marsh turned to run. He made it 3 steps before hands grabbed him from behind. One arm twisted behind his back, then the other. Pain shot through his shoulders. His knees buckled and he went down hard onto the concrete. Someone's knee pressed into his spine. Someone else pulled his arms tighter. He could not breathe. He could not move. A voice near his ear, calm and professional. "Stop fighting. You're only making this worse." Marsh stopped. They pulled him to his feet and walked him toward the SUV. He looked back once. Collins was still standing there, hands raised, face wet, mouth moving in words Marsh could not hear. And inside the SUV, On the seat beside him was his briefcase, the one he had left in his apartment that morning. They had been in his apartment while he was still there. They did not take him to Langley. They took him to a building with no sign and no windows, and led him through a side entrance into a room with a table and 2 chairs and nothing else. The walls were white. The floor was concrete. There was a camera in the corner with a red light that did not blink. They sat him in one of the chairs and left. The door locked behind them. Marsh sat very still. His shoulders ached where they had twisted his arms. His knees throbbed from hitting the concrete. But it was not the pain that stayed with him. It was the briefcase. The fact that they had been close enough to touch him and he had never known. He did not know how much time passed. There is no clock, no window. Then he heard it. A sound from somewhere beyond the wall, muffled, distant, but unmistakable. A scream, short, cut off, then nothing. Marsh stood up. He walked to the door and tried the handle. Locked. He pressed his ear to the surface and listened. Silence. He stepped back and looked around the room. That was when he saw it. A dark stain on the floor near the corner, roughly circular. Someone had tried to clean it, but the concrete had absorbed it too deeply. Marsh sat back down. An hour passed, maybe more. Then the lights went out. Complete darkness. Marsh could not see his own hands. He stood up and reached for the table but misjudged the distance, and his hip hit the edge hard. He stumbled and caught himself against the wall. He stood in the center of the room, breathing hard, heart pounding. Minutes passed, or hours. Then the lights came back on. The door opened. A man walked in. Not Hale, someone older. Gray suit, gray hair. The kind of face that had spent decades making decisions other people lived with. He sat down across from Marsh and folded his hands on the table as if nothing had happened. "My name is Thomas Birch. I am General Counsel for the Central Intelligence Agency. Do you know why you are here?" Marsh said nothing. Birch opened a folder and pulled out a photograph. He slid it across the table. It was a picture of Marsh sitting in the hotel bar. Across from Claire Lindgren, the envelope on the table between them. Another photograph, Marsh handing the envelope to Lindgren. Another, Lindgren opening the envelope and reading. Then another photograph. Marsh stopped breathing. It was a picture of him sleeping in the motel room outside Baltimore, mouth open, lying on top of the covers, fully clothed. The documents spread out on the bed beside him. They had been in the room while he slept. Birch pulled out another photograph. A woman in her 50s getting out of a car outside a grocery store. Marsh recognized her immediately. His mother. The photograph was dated yesterday. Another photograph, a house in the suburbs, his ex-wife's house. Lights on in the kitchen, a shadow moving past the window. Another, Eric Dorn, standing on his porch, time-stamped that morning, 8 hours after Marsh had left. Birch laid them out in a row. "We have been watching you for a long time, Daniel. Every step you took, we were there. Every person you spoke to, we documented. Every choice you made, we anticipated." He leaned back. "You gave classified material to a journalist. That is a federal crime. You could go to prison for 20 years. Or," he paused, "you could explain that you were confused, that you misunderstood the process, and in exchange, we could treat this as an internal matter, a suspension, no charges, no trial, no prison." Marsh looked at the photographs. His mother, his ex-wife, Dorn. What happens to them? Birch tilted his head slightly. That depends on you. And the story? Birch smiled, cold and thin. There is no story. Miss Lindgren received a classified document from an unknown source. She has 48 hours to verify it. In that time, we will provide her office with a counter-narrative, updated debriefs, institutional support at the highest levels. And when she realizes that printing your story would cost her every source she has ever cultivated, she will kill it herself. He closed the folder. She works for a newspaper that depends on access, Daniel, and access is something we control. Marsh felt something break inside him, not hope, something deeper, the belief that truth mattered more than power. Birch stood up. You will be released in the morning. You will sign a statement acknowledging your error. You will surrender your clearance, and you will never speak about this again to anyone, ever. He walked to the door. Marsh spoke quietly. And if I refuse? Birch stopped. He didn't turn around. Then the people in those photographs start having accidents. Your mother's car fails on the highway. Your ex-wife's house catches fire. Eric Dorn has a heart attack in his sleep. These things happen, Daniel. He opened the door. The choice is yours, but choose quickly. My patience has limits. He stepped into the hallway. Marsh stood up. Wait. Birch turned back. Marsh walked to the table and looked down at the photographs. His mother, Sarah, Dorn. People who had nothing to do with this except the fact that he had existed in their lives. I will sign your statement. I will surrender my clearance. I will disappear. Birch nodded. A wise choice. But I need you to answer one question. Birch's expression did not change. Who wrote the fabricated reference number in the curveball file? The debrief session that never happened? Birch stared at him. Why does that matter? Because if I am going to confess to stealing classified material, I want to know the lie was big enough to be worth destroying my life over. Birch studied him for a long moment. Then he smiled. You still do not understand. You think this is about one source, one file, one war. But this is about a system that has decided what needs to be true. And once that decision is made, people like you and me do not get to question it. So you did write it. I did not say that. You did not have to. Birch's smile faded. Sign the statement, Daniel. Go home. Forget all of this, because the alternative is not prison, it is erasure, and no one will remember your name long enough to wonder what happened to you. He turned and walked out. The door locked behind them. Marsh sat alone in the room. The fluorescent lights hummed. The red camera light glowed in the corner. The stain on the floor seemed darker now. He thought about his mother, about Sarah, about Dorn and Moss and Collins and everyone who had been pulled into this orbit just by being near him. And then he thought about something else. Birch had not denied writing the reference number. He had simply refused to confirm it, which meant it mattered, which meant it was the one thread that, if pulled, could unravel everything. Marsh stood up. He walked to the door and knocked. A guard opened it. I need to speak to Birch again. No. Tell him I have something he wants. The guard hesitated. Then he closed the door. 10 minutes later, Birch returned. He did not sit down. What is it? Marsh looked at him. I will sign the statement. I will surrender my clearance. I will disappear. But I need one thing in exchange. You are not in a position to negotiate. Leave them alone. My mother, Sarah, Dorn, everyone in those photographs. You let them live their lives and I will do whatever you want. Birch considered this. And if I agree, then I sign, tonight, right now. and you never hear from me again." Birch walked to the table and sat down. He pulled out a pen and a single sheet of paper. He slid them across. "This is a binding non-disclosure agreement. Violation results in immediate prosecution. No trial, no appeal, just a cell." Marsh picked up the pen. "And they are safe as long as you are silent." Marsh signed. Birch took the paper, folded it, and stood. "You will be released in 2 hours. A car will take you home. You will find a severance package and instructions in your mailbox tomorrow." He walked to the door. Marsh spoke one last time. "It will not hold." Birch stopped. "What?" "The lie. It is too big. Eventually someone will prove it. Maybe not me. Maybe not tomorrow. But someone." Birch turned back slowly. His face was calm, almost sad. "Perhaps, but by then the war will be over. The decisions will be made. The bodies will be buried. And the people responsible will have moved on to the next crisis. That is how history works, Daniel. The lie gets you through the door. The truth arrives too late to matter." He opened the door and walked out. The lock clicked. 2 hours later, they released him. A silent ride back to his apartment in an unmarked car. When he walked inside, everything was exactly as he had left it, except for one thing. On the kitchen counter was a padded envelope. Inside was his passport, his security badge, and a letter on agency stationery. "Thank you for your 12 years of service. Your resignation has been accepted effective immediately." There was no signature. Marsh set the letter down and walked to the window. The street below was quiet, normal, as if the world had not just ended. His phone buzzed. A text message, unknown number. "You made the right choice." Marsh deleted it. Then he turned off his phone, pulled the battery, and sat down on the floor with his back against the wall. He sat there until the sun came up. Chapter 5. The truth. After the order. 3 weeks later, Eric Dorn died in his sleep. The obituary was short. Heart failure. No foul play suspected. Services private. The kind of death that happens to men in their 60s who live alone and do not have anyone left to ask questions. Marsh read the notice on his laptop in a coffee shop in Silver Spring. He read it 3 times. Then he closed the screen and sat with his hands flat on the table, feeling the grain of the wood under his palms, concentrating on something physical, because if he let himself think, he would start shaking and he would not be able to stop. They had killed Dorn. The deal Birch had made was worthless. Silence would not save anyone. It never had. Marsh stood up and left the coffee shop. He drove to Virginia. The funeral was held in a small church outside the town where Dorn had lived. Marsh arrived late and sat in the back. There were 11 people in the pews. No family, no agency representation, just neighbors and one older woman who cried into a handkerchief she kept folding and unfolding. The service was brief. A pastor who had clearly never met Dorn read from a script. No one gave a eulogy. It was the kind of funeral that happens when a man dies alone and the world does not notice. Marsh stayed until everyone else had left. Then he walked to the grave. The coffin had already been lowered. The dirt had already been filled in. A temporary marker with Dorn's name and dates and nothing else. And lying on the fresh dirt was a small bouquet of white flowers wrapped in plastic. Marsh knelt down. His knees sank into the soft earth. He picked up the bouquet and felt the weight of something inside. He unwrapped it carefully. A small USB drive, black, unmarked, and a piece of paper folded once. The handwriting was shaky but clear. If you are reading this, I am dead. If I am dead, it means they did not stop. It means silence will not save you. I have spent 15 years documenting what they did. All of it is on this drive. Names, dates, proof. I was too afraid to use it, do what I could not. Marsh read the note twice. Then he looked around the cemetery. Empty. No cars, no one watching. Just rows of stones and wind moving through bare trees. He slipped the drive into his pocket, placed the flowers back on the grave, and walked to his car. He did not go home. He drove north for 2 hours to a library in a town he had never been to. He used a public computer, logged in as a guest, and inserted the drive. It took 15 seconds to load. When the directory opened, Marsh felt his breath catch. 437 files, documents, emails, audio recordings, scanned photographs, communications between intelligence officials and policymakers, assessments that had been altered, sources that had been fabricated, warnings that had been deleted, and at the center, a folder labeled Curveball. Marsh opened it. Inside were copies of every communication related to the source dating back to 1998, the original German warnings, the American dismissals, the decision to reactivate the source in 2001 despite the warnings, the fabricated debrief references, and at the bottom, an audio file. Marsh put on the headphones and clicked it. Richard Hale's voice came through, calm and professional. We are not in the business of certainty. We are in the business of policy support. If the policy requires evidence of bioweapons, then our job is to provide that evidence. Curveball gives us what we need. Whether he is lying or not is irrelevant. Marsh closed his eyes and listened to the entire recording. When it finished, he sat in silence. This was it. Documented proof that the intelligence had been knowingly fabricated. Then he saw the other folder. It was labeled active. The date stamp was from 2 weeks ago, 2 weeks before Dorn died. Marsh hesitated. Then he opened it. Inside were files he did not understand at first. Operational names, geographic coordinates, dates in the future, asset lists, cover identities. And then he understood. These were not historical documents. These were current operations, planned operations, some scheduled for next month, some for next year. And at the bottom of the folder, a file labeled Containment Protocol. He opened it. A memo, dated 3 days ago, addressed to Richard Hale. Subject, Daniel Marsh, Risk Assessment and Neutralization Timeline. Marsh read it slowly. The memo outlined his movements since his release from custody, his visit to Dorn, his meeting with Lindgren, his pattern of behavior. And then it laid out a plan. Phase 1. Allow subject to acquire Dorn materials, completed. Phase 2. Monitor distribution attempts, intercept where possible, in progress. Phase 3. Arrest on federal charges once materials are distributed. Public trial ensures narrative control and discredits future disclosures. Phase 4. Long-term incarceration, estimated 8 to 12 years, subject neutralized for duration of current operational cycle. Note, Dorn elimination necessary to ensure no secondary source corroboration. Executed successfully. Death attributed to natural causes. Marsh sat very still. They had known. They had known he would go to the funeral. They had known he would find the drive. They had let him find it. Because arresting him after he distributed classified material was cleaner than silencing him quietly. A public trial would discredit him. would make him a traitor instead of a whistleblower. They were not trying to stop him. They were using him. Marsh looked at the screen, at the list of future operations, at the names of agents in the field whose covers would be blown if this information became public, at the identities of foreign assets who would be killed if their governments discovered they were working for the Americans. If he released everything, people would die. Real people, agents who had families, local sources who had risked everything to help. If he released only the historical materials about Curveball in Iraq, the current operations would continue. The system would continue, and everything he had sacrificed would only scratch the surface. Marsh sat in the library and stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then he made a choice. He copied the drive twice. On one copy, he deleted the active folder, left only the historical materials, the proof of past lies, the fabricated intelligence, the audio recordings. On the second copy, he left everything. Then he drove to a FedEx in Baltimore. He wore a baseball cap pulled low. He paid cash. He did not give his real name. He made 17 copies of the first drive, the safe one. He mailed them to journalists in London, Berlin, Toronto, to human rights organizations, to congressional staffers, to independent media outlets that had nothing to lose. He included no name, no letter, just one printed sentence. This is what they did not want you to see. Then he held the second drive in his hand, the complete one, the dangerous one. He walked outside and stood in the parking lot for a long time. Then he got in his car and drove to Washington. The Washington Post building was on K Street. Marsh parked 2 blocks away and walked. It was late afternoon, and the streets were crowded with people leaving work. He moved among them like a ghost. He walked into the lobby and asked for Claire Lindgren. The receptionist called upstairs. A few minutes later, Lindgren came down. She saw him and her expression changed. "Mr. Marsh, you should not be here." "I know, I need 5 minutes." She looked around the lobby. Then she nodded toward a conference room off to the side. They went in and she closed the door. "What's going on?" Marsh pulled the second drive from his pocket and set it on the table. "This contains everything, not just Iraq, current operations, future plans. Proof that the same people who lied us into one war are planning the next ones." Lindgren stared at the drive but did not touch it. "Where did you get this?" "Eric Dorn. He is dead. They killed him 3 days ago." Her face went pale. "If I take this, I know what happens. They will come for me. They will arrest me. I will go to prison. I know." "Then why are you giving it to me?" Marsh looked at her. "Because I am going to prison either way. I already sent out the Iraq materials. They are in 17 different countries by now. The moment those hit the press, I am done. So the question is not whether I lose everything. The question is whether I lose it for something that matters." Lindgren picked up the drive slowly. "There is information on here that could get people killed." "I know. I cannot print that. I will not print that. I am not asking you to. I am asking you to hold it, to verify it, to use the parts that show the pattern without burning the people in the field. You are a journalist. You know how to do that." She looked at him for a long time. "Why me?" "Because you are the only person I know who might care more about the truth than about access." Lindgren slipped the drive into her jacket. "If they find out I have this, tell them I forced it on you. That is the truth." She nodded slowly. "What are you going to do now?" Marsh smiled. It was a tired smile. I'm going to go home, and I'm going to wait. They came for him the next morning. He was in his apartment drinking coffee when he heard the footsteps in the hallway. Heavy, multiple people. He set the cup down and walked to the door. He opened it before they knocked. 6 federal agents, body armor, weapons drawn. The lead agent held up a badge. Daniel Marsh, you are under arrest for violation of the Espionage Act, unauthorized disclosure of classified information, and conspiracy to harm national security. Marsh raised his hands. I know. They put him in handcuffs and walked him down the stairs and outside where 3 black SUVs were waiting. A crowd had gathered on the sidewalk, phones out, cameras recording. Someone shouted, "Are you the whistleblower?" Marsh looked directly at the camera. Yes. The trial began 4 months later. The courtroom was packed. Journalists, activists, retired intelligence officers. Marsh's mother sat in the second row. She had aged 10 years and 10 weeks. Her hands shook when she gripped the railing. The prosecution was methodical. They presented the documents Marsh had taken, the emails to journalists, the testimony of the FedEx employee who remembered him, the forensic evidence from his laptop. They painted him as a traitor, a man who had taken an oath and broken it, a man who had endangered lives for his own sense of moral superiority. Marsh's lawyer argued necessity, argued public interest, argued that the documents proved a criminal conspiracy at the highest levels of government and that exposing it was not a crime but a duty. The jury deliberated for 6 days. They found him guilty on all counts. The judge set sentencing for 2 weeks later. On the morning of sentencing, Marsh was brought into the courtroom in handcuffs. His mother was there. She was crying before the proceedings even began. The judge looked down at him from the bench. "Mr. Marsh, you have been found guilty of violating the Espionage Act. Before I impose sentence, do you have anything you wish to say?" Marsh stood. His lawyer had advised him to apologize, to show remorse, to ask for leniency. He did not do that. "Your Honor, I took classified documents without authorization. I gave them to journalists. I violated my security oath. All of that is true. I do not dispute it." He paused. "But the documents I released proved that senior officials in the intelligence community knowingly used fabricated information to justify a war. A war that has killed thousands of Americans and hundreds of thousands of Iraqis. A war that is still happening." The judge's expression did not change. "Those officials have not been charged. They have not been investigated. They have not even been questioned. I am standing here facing 40 years in prison for exposing their lies, and they are free." He looked at the judge. "So I do not know if what I did was legal, but I know it was right, and if I had to do it again, I would." The courtroom was silent. The judge leaned back in his chair. "Mr. Marsh, I do not doubt that you believed you were acting in the public interest, but the law is clear. You do not get to decide which secrets are worth keeping and which are worth exposing." He paused. "I am sentencing you to 15 years in federal prison. You will be eligible for parole in 8. I am also recommending medium security, given that you pose no threat of violence." He looked at Marsh. "But understand this. If you violate the terms of your sentence in any way, I will not hesitate to extend it." Marsh nodded. "Yes, Your Honor." The judge brought down the gavel. They led Marsh out through the side door. As he walked past the gallery, he looked at his mother. She was standing now, both hands pressed against the railing, tears running down her face. He tried to smile at her, but his face would not move. In the hallway, his lawyer grabbed his arm. 15 years, that is better than we hoped. Marsh said nothing, because 15 years was still 15 years, and his mother was 71, and he might never see her outside of a prison visiting room again. They walked him through the corridor toward the exit, federal marshals on either side, handcuffs clicking against his wrists with every step. At the end of the corridor was a door that led to the parking lot where a van was waiting. Marsh could see it through the narrow window in the door. Gray and plain, and waiting to take him wherever they decided he needed to go. He stopped. The marshal stopped with him. Marsh turned around and looked back down the corridor, past his lawyer, past the reporters with their notebooks, past the closed courtroom doors. His mother was still standing at the railing. She had not moved. Her hands were still pressed against the wood. She was not crying anymore. She was just looking at him. Marsh held her gaze. He did not mouth any words. He did not nod. He did not try to signal anything. He just looked at her. And in that look was everything he could not say. That he was sorry. That he wished it had been different. That he knew she would wait for him even though he had no right to ask her to. That he had done this because somewhere inside him he still believed that the truth mattered more than survival. That he loved her. And that he was not coming back. Not really. Even if he walked out of prison one day, the man who walked out would not be the same man she had raised. His mother looked back at him, and she nodded. Just once. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, just acknowledgement that she understood, that she saw him, that she knew why he had done what he had done, even if she wished he had not done it. The marshals touched his arm. Marsh turned around. They pushed open the door. Cold air rushed in. Gray sky, a parking lot, a van with its engine running. Marsh walked forward. He didn't look back again. Daniel Marsh served 7 years in federal prison. He was released on April 14, 2010. He was 45 years old. His mother had died while he was inside. Heart attack in her garden. The neighbors found her lying in the tomato plants she had been watering. He was not allowed to attend the funeral. Richard Hale retired in 2006. He was never charged with any crime. Thomas Birch was promoted to deputy director in 2007. In 2008, the Senate Intelligence Committee confirmed that the curveball source had been fabricated and that warnings had been ignored. No one was held accountable. The war in Iraq killed 4,491 American soldiers and an estimated 200,000 to 500,000 Iraqi civilians. The end.